Hi guys, it is Tamara. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about complex post-traumatic stress disorder because a lot of you have asked me to focus on this topic. So I'm going to be bringing it up today, and I want to break it down and give you a little bit more insight that maybe you didn't have before. So this will not be a long video, but I did want to give you an overview of what complex PTSD is. And at the end of the video, I'm going to post a previous video that I did on this topic. So thank you so much for coming back to my channel. For those who are subscribed and participating, thank you so much. And for those who are new, I encourage you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button so that you can stick around with us, stay on our channel, be a part of our validating and growing community. We are certainly not invalidating by any stretch. We're actually very validating. And I don't think we validate just to make each other feel better. I think we validate the truth. And I think that's what sets our channel apart. So I welcome you to subscribe. The benefits for you in today's video is that I'm going to highlight complex PTSD. And I want to define a couple of things, including the symptoms. So when you hear the term complex PTSD, what comes to mind for you? Are you thinking that maybe it's a more intensified PTSD? Are you thinking that, maybe that means, I'm struggling a lot more than other people who have been diagnosed with PTSD? A lot of my clients feel that way, right? They feel that when you diagnose them with complex PTSD, it must be worse. It must be more intense. It must be, something huge for a doctor to say that I have complex PTSD, right? Because if you look up the word complex, that really does mean convoluted and confused, right? Intertwined with, confusing elements. So, when you hear the word complex, you're thinking, oh, geez, does that mean that, I'm a confusing case? Does that mean that this is, not so good for me? What's going on? So I want to clarify that. Complex PTSD is actually an associated anxiety disorder to PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder is listed in the DSM as an anxiety disorder. It's a part of the anxiety disorders. If you get a DSM or you have a professional in your family or you know someone who uses the DSM, you're going to see in the chapter on anxiety disorders, generalized anxiety, you're going to see social phobia and social anxiety, you're probably going to see agoraphobia, you're going to see obsessive compulsive disorder, you're going to see there's a phobia disorder, or I'm trying to think of the other thing that's there, acute and chronic PTSD. You're going to see a lot of anxiety related disorders, and in that same chapter you're going to see PTSD. Well, a doctor will usually say, okay, this person has a lot of symptoms of trauma, and so we're going to go ahead and diagnose PTSD. But what kind of PTSD is this? And that's kind of the question that I'm faced with when clients or patients come to see me. What kind of PTSD is this? And if it's complex or complicated, then what's creating that issue? So a doctor is going to look at the chapter on anxiety disorders. They're going to diagnose PTSD. And then if they see necessary, they're going to go a little bit further and diagnose complex PTSD. Now, complex post-traumatic stress disorder is a label that is given to a patient or a client who has had repeated trauma over a certain duration of time. So an example of this would be at 5, you were molested by your dad. At 12, you were raped by your boyfriend. At 14, you witnessed a car crash that was severe and deadly. At 16, you lost your grandmother tragically and unexpectedly. At 20, you witnessed a murder, right? So that is complex PTSD. That's one element of it, right? There's this repeated long-term pattern of trauma that you continue to experience over time. It's not one single event. If you're diagnosed with just post-traumatic stress disorder, you likely have been categorized as someone who has only experienced one trauma. And that one trauma may have been intense, it may have been emotionally and psychologically overwhelming, it may also have been really difficult to get past. You may also experience recurrent symptoms of PTSD, right? Flashbacks and avoidance behaviors and hypervigilance and fear and agitation and sleep disturbance, right? All those things that I talked about in this video up here, you're probably experiencing with the diagnosis of PTSD. So, you know, I don't want you to feel like, well, complex PTSD sounds like it's a lot worse than mine, or my diagnosis of just PTSD. Does that mean you know, my experience is minute or minimized? Not at all. What it means is PTSD without the complex piece of it, you know, it's really describing, I should say, one single event that has created a trauma for you. Complex PTSD involves a series of traumas over time that are repeated. Now, there are some situations where you may find yourself doubting certain situations as complex PTSD. So let me just throw them out here, okay? The first situation that is likely to occur is, you know, an incident involving rape or child molestation, right? You know, there's a high percentage rate of children who are being sexually abused, and usually a child who is sexually abused either ends up becoming raped at an older age, or they become promiscuous, and then that leads to rape or other forced sexual activities. So, you know, that's one example of repeated trauma over time, a rape, a molestation, you know, over so many years. Another pattern of repeated trauma can occur in, for lack of a better word, ghettos and lower socioeconomic neighborhoods where there's constant shootings, there's constant gang violence, there's constant fear of walking from home to school or from school to home, right? You know, you hear a lot of domestic violence all around you. There's a ton of drug activity, murders, crime on the street, right? You may walk past a series of homeless individuals. So, you know, that can also be categorized as complex PTSD or complex trauma, living in a socioeconomic neighborhood or environment that's really difficult and rough. Kids who grow up in ghettos or in projects or developments, you know, those kind of areas where people are kind of housed together and squished together like sardines. You know, you can get a child come out of there with chronic and complex post-traumatic stress disorder. It's likely. Children who have to listen to gunshots being shot frequently, children who fear for their lives, children who have fathers or mothers who work in the Air Force, who work in the military, who are veterans. My dad was a veteran. Or children who have parents who are police officers and FBI agents and that kind of thing. They can also experience complex PTSD. You know, so let me give you an example of that. You know, there are some kids who may have a parent, a dad who's a police officer. I have one family that's like that I see now. And every time he goes out, she worries. And it's almost to a point of panic attacks because she's fearful that what happened in the past may happen again. And so this happens with a lot of families. Police officers put their lives on the line, the good ones, the sweet ones, the wonderful ones, the dedicated ones. They put their lives on the line. And sometimes they will get shot, stabbed, chased, harassed, stalked, the list goes on. And they can get past that, but then it can happen again and again and again. So, you know, that can really affect a child throughout the lifespan, right? Throughout their development as a child, all the way from early childhood to adolescence to early adulthood. It can really affect them, and it can become a complex PTSD, thing. It's a possibility. I'm trying to think of some more situations that can be considered chronic and complex PTSD. Okay, a situation where you have a loved one who has a chronic condition. So someone who has schizophrenia and who has ended up on the streets, homeless and sleeping and prostituting. Most individuals with schizophrenia end up homeless. There's a strong correlation between the two, homelessness and schizophrenia, especially when the schizophrenia is in its active stages, when there's hallucinations and delusions and thought disturbance. So if you have a loved one with a chronic mental health condition, a severe mental health condition, you know, you can experience complex PTSD because each event that is traumatizing can occur over a series of events, right? He or she may be homeless, you know, one time. He or she may end up in a drug rehab another time. He or she may be close to death another time. He or she may have attempted a suicide, you know, a suicide. So, you know, you can experience complex PTSD over time with a loved one who has severe and chronic mental health conditions, a medical condition, okay? So someone like my grandmother who has diabetes and who has had kidney failure and who has had an infection that has aggressively attacked her organs, that can happen. Again, she's kind of like Bubble Boy, right? She kind of has to be protected in this huge bubble where germs are not present. You know, she stays out of the cold. You know, she watches her blood sugar. So that kind of high maintenance and having to deal with it over a series of events, making some mistakes, forgetting to give insulin, you know, seeing diabetic shock, all of those things, internal bleeding, you know, all of that can trigger complex PTSD. All right. So again, complex PTSD is a series of events over time that is traumatic. Post-traumatic stress disorder is one single event that has been intensely affecting you. It's impacted you. It's made, you know, your life difficult. You've had flashbacks. You've had sleep disturbance. You've had avoidance behaviors. You've had withdrawal and isolation, right? That's PTSD. Chronic PTSD and complex PTSD is a lot more in-depth and comprehensive. You've had a series of traumas over time. That's the way that I want you guys to think about it. That's going to help you decipher between the two. So let me just go down some symptoms, all right? So I'm going to grab my notes here, and I want to go down some symptoms of complex PTSD just so that you guys will have them and be aware of them, okay? The first symptom is something known as negative self-view, a negative self-view. You know, that's kind of like the negative self-talk we talk about. It's like the cognitive distortions I talked about in this video. Negative worldview is pessimistic, right? It's fatalistic, it's nihilistic. You know, nothing good is going to happen. The world is not a wonderful place, excuse me. The world is a terrible place. You know, I have no place in the world, right? That is a negative worldview, a negative self-view as well. All right. The next one is a change in worldview. Research suggests that if you have complex or chronic PTSD, you're likely to experience a change in how you perceive the world around you. You're likely to see things as more fatalistic. You're likely to feel more depressed. You're likely to experience learned helplessness, which is something I talk about in this video up here. You're likely to feel overwhelmed every day. You're likely to, you know, justify feeling depressed and unmotivated. Okay, so having a change in worldview is something that happens. The next is emotion dysregulation. So not being able to really manage your emotions appropriately because you're so emotional, or you're so negativistic, or negative, or hopeless, or helpless, right? You experience this dysregulation in your emotions. You need medication, you need counseling, you need all the services that you can get to manage you. That's likely to happen with complex PTSD. The next one is relationship issues, attachment and detachment, okay? So that's all, you know, summed up in one statement or one sentence. Attachment issues, relationship issues, and detachment. Basically what that means is relationship issues tend to be chronic and frequent. There's hardly any peace, and when there is, it only lasts for a short period of time. Detachment, you're isolating and withdrawing, you're pulling back. And attachment issues means that you may have some difficulty attaching in a healthy fashion, which makes, you know, bonding with other people really difficult. All right. And last but not least is a preoccupation with the trauma. And, you know, I like to call that an obsession. There are some people with complex PTSD who have an obsessive mindset when it comes to life, when it comes to trauma, when it comes to fear, anxiety, depression, or any other issue in life. They're just kind of obsessive, and they do what's called rumination. They ruminate and they obsess about it and they think about it, and it's this cyclic pattern, and it kind of keeps you stuck. So let me just give you guys one statistic. I think this is important for you because a lot of people, you know, try to shy away from the fact that they could be experiencing this themselves. I've had a few people come into my office and say, you know what, Tamara, I don't have this, you know, and I'll say, okay, I mean, I understand your hesitation and your fear, but this is kind of what I'm seeing for you as a diagnosis. They say, no, I don't want to see that. But between 7 to 8% of Americans experience complex PTSD at some point in their lives. About 7 to 8% of individuals and adults experience complex PTSD at some point in their lives. So it's likely to happen to you. It's likely to happen to me. It's likely to happen to my family. It's something that we can't escape, right? Life is pressuring. It can be very emotional. It can be very frightening, uncertain. And so because of that, we have to be modest and humble and aware of the fact that this could be us at some point, or somebody that we love. So my one suggestion to you when it comes to complex PTSD is, if you see somebody who's experiencing trauma repeatedly over a series of time, or a long period of time, I should say, I suggest encouraging them into counseling, encouraging medication if it is needed, encourage medical following. Go to your PCP, your primary care physician, and get treatment. I also encourage education, like you're doing right now, watching this long video. I'm so sorry about that, guys. Doing your own research and just educating yourself. So that's my one suggestion to end this video. Thank you so much for being with me today in this very long video. I'm sorry it's 16 minutes long, but I wanted to make sure that you guys had comprehensive information. I will see you guys on Monday with a brand new topic. Monday is February, and it's the month of trauma. So we're going to be talking about trauma all the way until the beginning of March. I'll see you soon. Bye.